Jasmine Crockett gives a secret signal to her dog. 5 minutes, the judge stops the courtroom in shock. Just 5 minutes into the federal courtroom session in Washington, D.C., silence fell like a hammer. As a scarred German shepherd, once wounded in the line of duty, suddenly lunged toward the defendant with a bone-chilling growl. No one understood what was happening until they saw Jasmine Crockett discreetly make a hand signal only the dog would recognize. A hidden listening device was uncovered. A spy network began to unravel. The judge had no choice but to stop the entire trial. But why did Caroline risk everything in front of hundreds of government eyes? And what terrifying truth was being buried beneath this seemingly ordinary case? Storm gray clouds loomed over Washington, D.C., casting a grim shadow on the federal courthouse. The air was thick, rain threatening but never falling, suspense hanging like a held breath. Courtroom 7 buzzed with tension. Armed guards at every door, the gallery packed with reporters, agents, and military brass. This wasn't just a trial, it was a potential national rupture. Whispers of espionage and treason clung to the marble walls, heavy and inescapable. And in the center of it all was a woman who didn't ask to be here, but who would become the unexpected axis of everything. Jasmine Crockett. As the doors swung open, silence dropped like a guillotine. She stepped in, not as a politician, not as a press secretary, but as a sentinel of truth, flanked by her silent companion, Bruno, a scarred, battle-worn German shepherd whose gaze could cut through steel. Every eye turned to her, every judgment weighed her down, but she walked forward anyway. Bruno moved with her in perfect sync, his steps fluid, almost ghost-like on the polished marble floor. His scar along the left flank, a brutal reminder of the day he took a bomb blast head-on to save a president, twitched slightly with each step. He wasn't just a dog, he was a warrior. And Jasmine wasn't just his handler. She was his partner in battles unseen, ones fought not on the streets, but in the shadows of democracy. The two of them were anomalies in this courtroom of suits and smirks. She was not welcomed here. Her presence irritated the elite legal machinery. A press secretary with a dog? Absurd, some scoffed. But Jasmine didn't flinch, because beneath her composed exterior burned the knowledge that the system she stood in was already compromised. She was here not just to observe, but to expose. She didn't wear a badge, but she carried something far more dangerous. Clarity, and the truth she knew made people sweat. Seated at the defendant's table was Victor Grayson, a man who looked as if he were carved from smugness and shadows. At 52, with perfectly parted silver hair and a jaw clenched just a beat too tight, he wore his accusations like armor, accused of leaking classified Pentagon intelligence to Chinese agents, yet wearing a calm so calculated it bordered on sinister. He didn't look guilty. He looked untouchable. That's what made him dangerous. The whispers around his espionage had swirled for years, but now finally he was facing judgment. Or so it seemed. His legal team, led by the unshakable Thomas Reed, was prepared to eviscerate every charge. The case had no video, no fingerprints, no smoking gun, just rumors, suspicion, and one damning variable they hadn't planned on. Jasmine Crockett. Her arrival tilted the room's equilibrium. Grayson's eyes found hers, and held. Presiding over this storm was Judge Daniel Harper, a man whose very presence silenced even the boldest attorneys. With a face etched by decades of experience and silver-streaked hair combed back with military precision, he was known for two things: his intolerance for nonsense and his refusal to believe in coincidence. Harper had seen every trick in the book, every sleight of hand the legal world had to offer. Yet even he couldn't shake the gravity of this particular trial. Jasmine Crockett had been silent for most of the trial, watchful, composed, restrained. But beneath that surface calm was a storm of precision and readiness. She wasn't here to posture. She was here for one reason only: to protect what no one else seemed able or willing to protect. Her eyes flicked briefly to Grayson. He was leaning back, relaxed, smug, one hand lazily spinning a pen between his fingers. He didn't see it coming. No one did. Jasmine's right hand, resting on the table, began a quiet rhythm. 3 light taps. Not random, not nervous, deliberate, coded, trained. It was a language she and Bruno had practiced in bunkers, in labs, in simulations the public never knew existed. As her fingers finished the third tap, she didn't even look at Bruno. She didn't have to. The air shifted like a charge had been released. Bruno froze. His entire body went stiff, as if electricity surged through every sinew. His ears snapped upright, his tail lowered slightly. Combat mode. Then his nose flared, rapidly inhaling the currents of tension that no human could ever perceive. A deep, throaty growl began to rise from his chest. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't panic. It was an ancient, primal sound that no one in the courtroom could mistake. Warning. The gallery turned their heads in unison, eyes locking onto the German shepherd now standing fully alert, trembling not with fear, but with focus. His eyes zeroed in on Victor Grayson, who had suddenly stopped spinning his pen. Grayson sat frozen, his smirk faltering. Bruno took a step forward, then another. Jasmine's grip tightened on the leash, but it was clear. This wasn't about obedience anymore. This was instinct. And then Bruno lunged, not to attack, but to confront, to expose. His body slammed against the barrier between the counsel tables, barking now in short, sharp bursts, his gaze never leaving Grayson's face. The courtroom detonated in gasps and chaos. A juror half rose from her seat. A reporter dropped his camera. A clerk screamed. Grayson recoiled in his chair, knocking over a water pitcher as he tried to push back. His lawyer shouted something unintelligible, voice cracking. And then, with the commanding authority of a man who'd stared down cartel leaders and war criminals, Judge Daniel Harper stood and brought his gavel down like the wrath of thunder. This court is in recess. 15 minutes. Bailiffs, clear the room immediately. His voice was thunder, and it cut through the panic like a blade. But even as the courtroom swirled into confusion, bailiffs rushing to control the crowd, whispers erupting like wildfire, Harper's eyes locked onto Jasmine. She hadn't moved. She hadn't panicked. She sat with the storm at her feet, one hand still resting on Bruno's back. Her eyes said everything. The hallway outside the courtroom was a storm barely contained behind polished marble and stiff uniforms. Whispers slithered across the air like static. Security guards murmuring into radios. Reporters with wide eyes hovering just out of reach, trying to decipher what had just happened inside. But Jasmine Crockett had no room for noise. She was on the floor, one knee pressed into the cold tile, her hand buried deep in Bruno's thick fur, steadying them both. He was still tense, his body vibrating with leftover energy from the incident. His golden eyes didn't blink, fixed on the courtroom door as if daring it to open again. Jasmine leaned close, her lips near his ear. "It's okay," she whispered. "You did exactly what you were supposed to." Bruno huffed, a short burst of breath through his nose. Not a bark, but a release of restrained instinct. He'd done his part. Now it was up to her to make them believe. But Jasmine already knew what was coming. They'd question her judgment, dismiss the dog's reaction as hysteria, paint her as emotional, dramatic, unreliable. It wouldn't be the first time the system tried to punish her for being the only one willing to see the truth. Then came the familiar sound, heels striking marble with military precision. Jasmine didn't have to turn to know who it was. Her mother, Colonel Marietta Crockett, returned, approached with a calm forged from decades of classified operations and war zone briefings. She walked like a woman who'd never been out of uniform, spine straight, eyes hard, resolve written into every line on her face. She didn't ask if Jasmine was okay. She didn't need to. Instead, she knelt beside her daughter, her presence like a shield Jasmine didn't realize she needed. Gently, she brushed a loose strand of hair from Jasmine's face, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "He reacted to something real, didn't he?" Jasmine nodded, throat tight. "They're going to say it was nothing. They're going to say it's all in my head." Marietta scoffed. "They said the same thing to me in '98 when I flagged a mole 3 weeks before the Pentagon would listen. They want intuition until it doesn't fit their report." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly. Grayson isn't just hiding something. He's in control of something, and no one's willing to admit it. Her mother's hand gripped hers. "Then you make them." A few feet away, unnoticed by most, stood Special Agent Ethan Brooks. Lean, worn from too many years chasing ghosts and bureaucratic shadows, Ethan had the look of a man who didn't speak unless it mattered. And right now it mattered. His eyes weren't on Jasmine. They were on Bruno. Still tense, still focused, like he was waiting for the next move in a chess game only he could see. Ethan knew dogs. More than that, he knew patterns. False positives. Manipulated reactions. But this wasn't theater. It was precision. The way the dog had locked onto Grayson, the timing, the sequence. It was trained behavior reacting to something real. And Jasmine Crockett hadn't flinched. She'd expected it. That changed everything. Ethan took a breath and walked briskly past the whispering crowd, down the side hallway, and pushed through the heavy oak doors of Judge Harper's private chambers. The judge was mid-sentence with his clerk when Ethan entered, uninvited and unbothered. "Your Honor," Ethan said, voice low, calm but unwavering. That wasn't coincidence. Bruno's response in that courtroom wasn't accidental. He picked up something, possibly a device, possibly a behavioral cue. But it was targeted, trained. You need to delay the session and authorize a sweep. Harper, halfway out of his robe, froze. He stared at Ethan like a man weighing consequences in real time. "You're asking me to stall a national security trial because of a dog's hunch?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Not a hunch. Detection. That animal has a higher clearance than half the people in this building, and he's got a better record than most of them too. If you ignore what just happened, sir, you might be letting a traitor walk out of here free." Harper's face darkened. He didn't like being pressured, especially not by agents. But deep down, something had rattled him during that outburst in the courtroom. Something instinctual. And if a dog could feel it, maybe it was time he trusted his own gut again. The defendant's waiting room, tucked just behind the courtroom, was meant to offer calm, neutral walls, soft overhead lights, the illusion of control. But inside, Victor Grayson was unraveling. He sat hunched at the edge of the leather bench, elbows on knees, fingers twitching against each other in an erratic rhythm. The smug confidence he had worn like armor during the trial had vanished. His suit, still perfectly pressed, now seemed to suffocate him. Sweat dotted his temple, and his breath came faster, sharper. "She signaled him," he muttered under his breath, eyes locked on the floor. "That dog, he knew. She trained him to spot it." His voice cracked on the last word, barely audible, but charged with something that made the air feel heavier. In the far corner, Thomas Reed, his high-powered, meticulously calculated attorney, lifted his eyes from a folder and stared. Reed had defended drug lords, arms traffickers, even foreign diplomats under espionage suspicion, but he'd never seen Grayson like this. He studied his client with quiet intensity, noting the tremble in his hands, the haunted darting of his eyes, the way he kept repeating Jasmine's name, like it was a curse. "What do you mean, spot what?" Reed asked carefully, closing the folder and leaning in. Grayson didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, hands clasped together, mouth near his knuckles. "She knows," he whispered. "She doesn't have the proof yet, but she knows. And that dog, he felt it. They're not supposed to feel things." Reed's jaw tightened. Grayson's fear wasn't theatrical. It was raw, unfiltered. And it wasn't about prison. It was about being exposed. Something had rattled him to his core, and it wasn't evidence. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that bypasses facts and hits like a knife in the spine. Reed stood slowly, walked over to the narrow window, and pulled the blind down halfway. He didn't want anyone looking in, didn't want the press snapping a photo of his client sweating bullets while mumbling about dogs and press secretaries. He turned back to Grayson, voice measured but cold. "If there's something you haven't told me, now's the time." Grayson shook his head once, hard, like trying to knock loose a thought he couldn't speak aloud. "I didn't think she'd be here," he said, voice barely above a breath. "I didn't think she'd bring him." His tone dipped into panic again, and Reed stepped back, arms folding. In that moment, he knew. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just an unexpected witness, she was a threat. And Bruno, the scarred, silent shadow beside her, wasn't there to intimidate. He was there to hunt. And Victor Grayson? He was the scent. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was a legend wrapped in fur and scars. 3 years ago, during a classified security operation at a diplomatic summit in Brussels, he'd done what no human bodyguard could. A man with a briefcase had slipped past 2 Secret Service layers. No one noticed. No one but Bruno. In under 3 seconds, he had crossed the marble lobby, lunged through a line of security, and sank his teeth into the man's arm just as he reached for the detonator hidden beneath his sleeve. The explosion still happened, but not where it was meant to. Bruno took the full brunt of the blast. The president walked away without a scratch. Bruno didn't. Shrapnel tore into his side. His left flank was ripped open, muscle and bone exposed. The scar never faded. Doctors said he'd never serve again. Command wanted him retired. They offered medals, ceremonies, and a quiet home. Jasmine Crockett said no. She wasn't in Brussels that day, but she had studied every second of the surveillance footage. She watched the moment 1,000 times. The blur of movement, the instinctive dive, the raw courage in a creature built for loyalty. When Bruno was declared unfit for active field duty, she pushed back harder than anyone expected a press secretary would. She had clearance, influence, and above all, conviction. "He's not done," she told the agency brass, looking them dead in the eye. "You don't throw away a soldier because he bled." It wasn't sentiment, it was strategy. Jasmine knew the value of intuition, especially the kind that couldn't be faked or taught. So she made Bruno her partner. He became her second set of eyes and ears, shadowing her in meetings, briefings, and secure zones. People scoffed. A dog in the West Wing? They whispered about theatrics, about trying too hard to be noticed. But Jasmine didn't care. Because while others played politics, Bruno saw threats. And now, as they stood side by side in the center of a courtroom built to silence people like her, she knew that same scarred warrior would be the one to crack the system open. Again, the courtroom door groaned open, and Jasmine Crockett stepped inside like a storm front returning to finish what had started. Her expression was unreadable, sculpted from hours of military briefings, betrayal, and being told she didn't belong. But her eyes, sharp, focused, unrelenting, spoke of war. Bruno walked beside her, every step measured, every muscle taut beneath his coat, like a soldier returning to the battlefield. The gallery, once buzzing with post-recess chatter, fell into an unnatural silence as the pair made their way to the prosecution table. Victor Grayson didn't turn his head, but the way his fingers froze mid-tap against the oak desk betrayed him. Something inside him knew. Jasmine sat slowly, smoothing the front of her jacket with one hand, the other resting on the table near Bruno's leash. Her fingers moved. 3 controlled taps. The courtroom didn't hear it, but Bruno did. Like a switch had flipped, Bruno's demeanor changed in an instant. He rose to his feet without a sound. His ears twitched forward. His nose dropped to the floor. He didn't growl this time. He hunted. The German shepherd moved across the courtroom floor with the silence of a phantom, weaving between rows of stunned observers, eyes fixed on one destination. Every step heightened the pressure in the room, tension winding tighter with each sniff. Then he turned sharply toward the defendant's table. Gasps burst from the gallery like sudden turbulence on a plane. Bruno ducked under the table, sniffed the support beam, then the underside of the chair. One paw scratched the wooden floor once, then twice. Then he froze. His growl started low, like distant thunder rolling toward a storm. Deep, resonant, and certain. Judge Harper leaned forward, his fingers tightening on the arms of his chair. "What is he doing?" he asked, his voice hard as steel. Jasmine stood, not with hesitation, but with authority. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "he's signaling a foreign electronic device. It means there's something hidden." FBI agent Ethan Brooks moved so fast it seemed rehearsed. He dropped to one knee beside Bruno and swept his hand beneath the defendant's table. A second passed. Then he paused. Slowly, he withdrew a tiny matte black object, no larger than a quarter, blinking faintly with a red pulse. "Listening device," he confirmed aloud, "and it's live." The entire courtroom erupted. Chairs scraped, hands clutched mouths, reporters scrambled to tweet. One juror let out a broken, breathy, "Oh my God!" But all Jasmine saw was Grayson. His confident mask shattered like glass underfoot. Grayson's face turned a shade paler, his jaw tightening as he tried to maintain composure. His eyes darted, once to the judge, once to his attorney, then finally to Jasmine. She didn't move. She didn't blink. And that silence said more than any argument ever could. Thomas Reed, his attorney, sprang to his feet. "Your Honor," he stammered, we object to this breach of protocol." But Harper wasn't listening. The gavel came down like a warhammer. "Bailiffs, lock down the courtroom. Nobody leaves. Sweep every bench, every corner, every crack." The command sent a cascade of movement through the room, officers blocking exits, tech teams flooding in with scanners and sniffer tools. It was no longer a trial, it was a crime scene. And at the heart of it stood Jasmine, Crockett, and Bruno, the woman they once called just a press secretary, and the dog they tried to retire. Now the courtroom moved around them like planets around a gravitational force. Jasmine's presence, once questioned, now felt necessary, essential, unavoidable. Bruno, silent and still, had become the trial's most damning witness. He didn't bark for applause. He didn't need to. His instincts had just cracked open a secret hidden beneath layers of lies. Grayson had gone to trial believing he'd be untouchable. Now he couldn't stop sweating, couldn't stop blinking, because everything was unraveling, and it had started with a signal too subtle for humans, but not for Bruno. Inside the hastily secured forensic analysis room, fluorescent lights buzzed above like a warning siren, casting harsh white light over steel tables and state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. The mood was clinical, but the energy was electric. Everyone in the room knew this wasn't just about evidence anymore. This was about exposure. Ethan Brooks stood at the center, arms crossed, eyes locked on the small black listening device now lying under a forensic microscope. Its blinking red light had been disabled, but its silence didn't make it any less dangerous. It had already spoken, broadcast even, and now the task was to figure out to whom. Collins, the lead technician, moved with rapid precision. He didn't need a coffee or a cigarette. This was his fix: encrypted tech, near military grade, dropped in places it was never supposed to be. He unscrewed the casing delicately, exposing the circuitry inside. "This isn't hobby shop tech," he said, voice low but clear, "and it's definitely not American." Ethan moved closer, his breath catching for a half second as the internal components came into focus on the high-res monitor. "Walk me through it," he ordered. Collins pointed with a rubber-gloved finger. "Multi-frequency burst transmission, internal battery, limited range, which means it wasn't meant to store, it was meant to send." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Send what?" "Everything," Collins replied. "Audio picked up by an ultra-sensitive pin mic wired into the capsule. Sent in real time, in bursts, to a local relay, probably a mobile receiver within a 100-yard radius. From there, we're talking about encrypted rebroadcasting on an offshore server, maybe even bouncing through dark fiber lines." Ethan exhaled a long, slow breath. "Chinese?" Collins didn't even blink. "Black Dragon series encryption. Government tech, not commercial. If this was planted here, it was either someone trained directly by their intel agencies or someone with very deep pockets and very dangerous friends." The monitor flickered as code scrolled across the screen. "It's broadcasting on a frequency I've only seen in 2 other cases, both out of Shanghai. This is espionage-grade hardware." Ethan clenched his fist slowly, the weight of the implications tightening around his chest like a steel trap. A foreign-made surveillance device planted beneath the table of a man on trial for leaking national secrets to China during his federal trial. It was like a knife hidden in the jury box. "Can we trace it?" he asked. Collins paused, chewing on his bottom lip. "Maybe, but it's tricky. The device acts as a ghost. No MAC address, no serial number. We might be able to trace its relay signature, but we'd need satellite sweeps and NSA-level access to pull a real location." Ethan was already reaching for his phone. "We don't need a full location, just a direction." Collins blinked. "That's enough?" "It has to be," Ethan said, "because right now Jasmine, Crockett, and that damn dog are the only reason anyone even noticed it was here. If they hadn't signaled when they did, this whole case might have slipped into the dark without a trace. He paused, eyes still locked on the silent black disc. And Grayson would have walked free. Again. But even with this breakthrough, frustration itched under Ethan's skin. He knew how the system worked. A foreign device in the courtroom wasn't a conviction. It was an accusation. One the defense would call coincidence or unsubstantiated. He could already hear Thomas Reed spinning it into a narrative about planted evidence or courtroom theatrics. They would say Bruno was triggered by something else, that Jasmine Crockett acted emotionally, that the dog overreacted, that she overreacted, that it was all an act. And Ethan was sick of watching people like Jasmine be right and still get dismissed. He turned back to Collins, voice sharper now. We need anything else. Heat traces, skin oils, dust particulates, anything to tie this device to Grayson or someone working for him. Collins nodded, already assembling another analysis module. We're on it, but it won't be fast. Ethan tapped the table twice, then stared back at the monitor, jaw set. It doesn't have to be fast, he said. It just has to be true. Because truth was the only weapon Jasmine had left. And tonight, that truth had teeth. The knock on the temporary FBI operations door was barely audible over the hum of activity inside. Agents typing, phones ringing, printers spitting out updated briefs. Ethan Brooks didn't look up at first. He was still staring at the schematic of the Chinese listening device recovered from the courtroom. But when the agent posted by the door, opened it, and stepped aside for an older woman to enter, the entire energy in the room shifted. She didn't command attention through volume or presence, but through silence. The kind of silence that comes from having lived with secrets for too long. Helen Parker stepped inside, eyes scanning the room like a soldier entering a battlefield she hadn't walked in years. Her posture was upright, her face worn but resolute, and her words came without hesitation. I worked under Grayson, she said. Pentagon Communications Division. I've been retired 5 years. But I saw something I shouldn't have ignored. And after what your dog found today, I think you need to hear it. They sat her down in the debriefing corner, where the acoustics were clean and the lighting harsh by design. Ethan leaned forward across the table, eyes never leaving hers. What did you see? Helen inhaled deeply, then launched into her story with the measured cadence of someone who had testified before, but never quite like this. 2 weeks ago, lower levels of the Pentagon employee garage. I was dropping off paperwork for an old friend. Late at night, maybe 7:15 p.m. I saw Grayson near a black SUV. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize. A man, medium build, tan coat, ball cap. Nothing unusual, until Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out a small package. Could have been a hard drive, a drive clone, something small but important. He passed it to the man like it was routine. No words exchanged. The man left in a black vehicle, but I remember the plate, XJR 5892. I saw it clear as day when he pulled out. The room went dead quiet. Olivia Bennett, standing nearby with her tablet, immediately began typing. Got it, she muttered, running it through DMV and Homeland databases. Ethan sat straighter, every hair on his arm standing up. Why didn't you report this before? He asked carefully. Helen looked down, then back up, eyes blazing now. Because I know how this works. I saw people ignored for less. I thought maybe I was overreacting. But after today, after that dog pointed right at him, I can't stay silent anymore. Olivia's voice suddenly cut through the room. We've got a hit. The plate's linked to a dummy logistics company registered in Norfolk. Paper trail leads to a warehouse, no listed address. Off Route 522, Virginia. The company's inactive, but the toll records show recent movement. Same vehicle crossed a rural toll reader 2 nights ago. Ethan stood so fast his chair clattered against the wall. That's it, he said under his breath. That's the relay point. That's where they're stashing the real data. Backups, communications gear, maybe even the control system for the device we found in court. He turned to Olivia. I want satellite recon on that site within the hour. Pull thermal imagery. Use the DOJ back channel if you have to. No lights, no sirens, no leaks. Olivia nodded, already dialing into the secure field coordination line. Understood. You want me on site? Ethan looked toward Helen. You just gave us the first physical link between Grayson and an active op. We're not letting this slip. Then to Olivia. Yeah, you're coming with me. We're moving tonight. Helen stood slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. I know people won't believe her, she said, glancing toward the courtroom hallway where Jasmine had just disappeared. They'll say it was luck, that she guessed, that she manipulated the dog. They'll say anything to make her small again. Ethan looked her dead in the eye. They've been trying to silence her since day one, but now we've got something they can't talk around. He walked toward the evidence wall, placed the printed license plate photo right next to the image of the surveillance device, and drew a thick red line between them. We just connected dots no one wanted us to find. And if this warehouse holds what I think it does, we're not just proving espionage, we're proving a system failure, one they can't deny. The agents began prepping gear, printing warrants, confirming air support blackouts. The energy was no longer speculative, it was mission-focused, and it all traced back to a woman they had nearly written off and a dog they nearly retired. Jasmine Crockett had trusted her instincts when no one else would. Now her instincts were fueling an operation that could bring down a traitor and possibly reveal something even darker, hidden in the shadows of national power. The hunt was no longer metaphorical. It had a target, a location, and a trail of lies waiting to be burned to ash. The hum of fluorescent lights in the FBI's makeshift operations center had become a low, relentless drone, one that merged with the tension building in the air like an electrical storm about to break. Jasmine Crockett stood still in the center of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, gaze fixed on the floor, but mind racing like a tactical map unfolding. Bruno sat at her side, unmoving, yet visibly coiled. His ears flicked at every unfamiliar sound, every whispered command exchanged between agents. He wasn't just alert, he was agitated. Jasmine had seen that posture before. Back in the West Wing after a suspicious package was discovered 3 floors below the press room. That same trembling stillness, that same quiet growl beneath his breath, that same locked-on awareness that something invisible to human senses was watching, listening, moving. She knelt slowly, placing one hand on his scarred side. You smell it, don't you? She whispered. It's still here. Across the room, Rachel Morgan moved like a ghost, unassuming, deliberate, the nation's foremost K-9 tactical specialist. She crouched beside Jasmine and Bruno, her eyes locked onto the shepherd's body language. He's fixated, she said softly, but not on the courtroom. Something else, still nearby. Rachel stood and addressed the room, her voice sharp but calm. Everyone clear the floor. We're doing a full behavioral grid sweep. No interruptions, no talking, no sudden movements. If something's here, Bruno will find it. Within seconds, chairs were pushed back. Wires coiled, monitors repositioned. The room transformed into a search grid. Rachel gave the signal. Search! Bruno's response was instant. Nose down, tail stiff, he began his slow, spiraling circuit of the room. He sniffed outlets, desks, the coffee table, nothing. Until he reached the far wall, a visitor's area where no one had sat for hours. He paused, nose hovering just inches above the arm of an old plastic chair. Then he turned, circled the chair twice, and stopped dead. A low, guttural growl emerged, and he planted his front paws firmly on the cushion. Jasmine's breath hitched. Rachel was already there, slicing into the fabric seam with a scalpel. Foam parted. The faint click of something metallic echoed through the room. And then she pulled it out. A sleek black device the size of a lipstick case. No visible ports, no LED indicators. Just one faintly glowing thermal seam across the back panel. Rachel turned it slowly in her gloved hands. Not a microphone, no speaker, no receiver. This isn't for listening, it's for sending. Ethan Brooks, who had just returned from the analysis lab, strode toward the center of the room. He snatched a latex glove from the evidence tray and took the device, turning it over in the light. This isn't surveillance. It's a burst data transmitter. Sends packets in encrypted short-range pulses, tiny enough to go unnoticed by basic scans. It's why we didn't catch it earlier. Rachel stepped forward. Someone planted it inside a federal operations room. This wasn't a leftover. This was planted after the court disruption. Jasmine looked up from Bruno, which means someone's been monitoring our investigation since we started pulling the threads. Ethan's eyes darkened, and feeding that information back to Grayson or whoever's running point for him. Rachel moved toward her mobile decryption kit, already testing the device's shielding. It's hardened, but I've seen tech like this before. You only use it when you can't afford to lose data. High priority exfil only. This is espionage-grade Tier 1 tech. Something we'd expect to find behind embassy walls or inside an encrypted kill switch server farm. She looked up, and it was under a chair in our secure room. The realization sucked the oxygen out of the air. The operation was no longer theoretical. This wasn't a rogue analyst offloading old secrets. This was ongoing, live, and inside their perimeter. Ethan paced twice, then spun toward the mission map. We're not waiting for confirmation anymore. He slapped a red file down on the war table. Satellite images, thermal signatures, topographic scans, all tied to the shell company property Helen Parker's intel had revealed. Here, he said, pointing at a fenced compound half buried in the forest off Route 522. Private land, no power grid, no wireless signal, no utility registration. It's dark. It's dead. It's perfect. Olivia Bennett entered the room at that moment, holding a new printout. Thermal sweeps confirm movement inside the building. Low activity, consistent with minimal occupancy. Like 2, maybe 3 people rotating shifts. Ethan grabbed it, scanning the numbers. And the plate from the SUV Helen saw? Same one pinged near this site just 3 days ago. He looked to Jasmine. This is it. Jasmine's expression didn't change. But Bruno growled softly again, a sound more like confirmation than threat. She stood, her hand still resting on his back. If they're still in there, she said, voice cold as winter steel, then every secret Grayson is hiding is about to come spilling out. Ethan turned to his team. We're going in quiet. Tactical gear only. No lights, no heat signatures. If they know we're coming, they'll torch the place before we get close. Rachel clipped a high-frequency beacon to Bruno's collar. We'll go through the west flank. Bruno leads point. If there's a scent trail, he'll find it. The agents began moving, loading weapons, syncing comms, sealing files. Jasmine walked behind them like the eye of a storm, Bruno at her heel. They had spent the entire day being disbelieved, dismissed, and disregarded. But now, the game had changed. The evidence had a pulse. The conspiracy had a location. And Jasmine Crockett, the woman they once called just a press secretary, was now leading a federal espionage takedown with a dog that had seen through the lies before anyone else dared to. The operation had a name now, and it started with her. The black SUVs rolled to a silent stop just past midnight, headlights off, tires crunching over gravel, and dried leaves as if the land itself had been untouched for years. The warehouse stood like a corpse in the woods, its siding rusted, its windows either shattered or sealed with warped plywood. At first glance, it looked abandoned, a forgotten relic of industrial decay. But the FBI's thermal scans didn't lie. There was movement here, faint, precise, deliberate. As the team fanned out, weapons drawn and radios set to whisper, Ethan Brooks motioned to Bruno and Jasmine, who stepped forward together like an arrowhead. Bruno's nose dropped low, scanning the air, his breathing steady. Jasmine watched him like a co-pilot reading terrain. Every twitch of muscle, every shift in stance meant something. And then Bruno stopped. Just outside the warehouse's warped loading dock, he stiffened, growled low, and turned left. His paws traced a narrow path in the dust. Footprints, fresh. Someone had been here hours ago, and not just passing through. The door creaked open under Rachel's gloved hand, revealing a cavernous, empty space lit only by moonlight, spilling through broken rafters. Empty crates lay scattered, but something felt wrong. Too clean, too arranged, the kind of mess meant to look like a mess. Bruno pulled ahead, weaving between support beams, his tail low and rigid. Then, without warning, he veered sharply toward the far wall, nose working furiously at a section of cracked concrete, partially hidden by an overturned workbench. Jasmine crouched beside him, brushing away the dust. Her fingers found a small indentation, barely visible, but unmistakably mechanical. A hidden hatch. Rachel grabbed a crowbar and wedged it into the seam. With a metallic groan, the slab shifted, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "He found it," Jasmine whispered. Bruno stood at the top of the steps, staring into the black like he'd seen this kind of shadow before. They moved fast and silent, boots echoing down the narrow metal staircase. The air grew colder, damper, and tinged with something stale, mildew and fear. At the bottom, the flashlight beams revealed a nightmare, a command post buried beneath the earth. Racks of computer towers lined the walls, all humming quietly on backup power. Filing cabinets with no labels, maps, red string, diagrams linking names, agencies, shipping manifests. In the center sat a reinforced steel safe, its keypad interface blinking softly. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cold and flat. "This isn't a hideout," he said. "This is a nerve center. This is active intelligence infrastructure." Rachel moved to the hard drives, carefully unhooking cables. Jasmine snapped photos of everything, the wiring, the diagrams, the encrypted terminals. Then her eyes locked on a file folder marked only with a symbol, a dragon wrapped around a satellite. She opened it. Inside, lists of dates, communications logs, drop locations. Clear, deliberate, and damning. Bruno sat silently, eyes on the stairwell, as if guarding them all from whatever still lurked above. Olivia cracked the safe with a portable scanner and pulled out 2 encrypted drives and a sealed envelope of classified Pentagon memoranda, each stamped with top secret //SCI. She turned to Ethan, breath catching in her throat. "We've got everything." Ethan didn't waste a second. "Secure the files, seal the drives, load the evidence crates. I want this entire room logged, tagged, and in federal custody before the sun's up." He glanced at Jasmine, who stood in the center of it all, Bruno at her side, chest rising and falling in sync with her breath. "You were right," he said quietly. "They thought they buried this, but you brought the shovel." Outside, the agents began hauling crates into the SUVs. The wind rising in the trees like nature itself was waking up to what had just been uncovered. Inside that warehouse was proof, not just of Grayson's guilt, but of a coordinated espionage network that had been operating in plain sight, protected by silence and arrogance. Jasmine Crockett had been underestimated, dismissed, even ridiculed for daring to trust a dog over a system. But now, with every encrypted file and every seized document, the truth was shifting. And when they returned to court, it wouldn't just be Grayson on trial. It would be the entire system that tried to pretend none of this was real. The courtroom had never been this quiet, not even during opening arguments. As Judge Harper returned to the bench, robes flowing like a storm cloud re-entering the fray, a kind of electric stillness blanketed every corner of courtroom 7. Gone were the whispers, the scoffs, the quiet dismissals that had once followed Jasmine Crockett like a shadow. Now all eyes were locked forward, as the woman they had once called just a press secretary stood beside Prosecutor Anna Reynolds and FBI agent Ethan Brooks, flanked by sealed crates, evidence bags, and a sealed digital vault that pulsed softly with threat. Judge Harper narrowed his gaze. "The court has reconvened. Ms. Reynolds, proceed." Anna stepped forward slowly, her voice firm, not theatrical, but lethal in its precision. "Your Honor, what we are about to present is not just new evidence. It is a comprehensive revelation of an active espionage cell operating on U.S. soil, led, facilitated, and protected by the defendant, Victor Grayson." She motioned to Ethan, who carried the first encrypted drive to the evidence table, then produced the accompanying chain of custody log. "This hard drive," he began, "was recovered from a subterranean bunker in rural Virginia, linked directly to a vehicle traced from the Pentagon parking lot via witness testimony and vehicle records." He paused, lifting a fingerprint analysis sheet. "The device contains terabytes of stolen data, classified communications between U.S. defense contractors, redacted transport protocols, and internal briefings from the Department of Defense. And it bears one fingerprint more than any other, Victor Grayson's, verified, matched, and confirmed by independent forensic labs." The room didn't gasp. It didn't have to. The weight of what was being said slammed into everyone like a tidal wave. Judge Harper leaned forward slightly, eyes flint hard. Go on. Anna opened the next file. Included in the physical evidence are diplomatic correspondence logs, digitally captured from within the hard drive, signed and time-stamped, proving that Mr. Grayson had direct, ongoing contact with representatives of the People's Republic of China's Intelligence Bureau. She lifted a printed page, a scanned memorandum in Mandarin, followed by its official translation. The language is clear. These aren't theoretical ties. These are operational directives. Grayson didn't sell secrets once. He reported in, regularly. Over months across the courtroom, Grayson sat frozen, the color draining from his face. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering frantically, but Grayson barely moved. Jasmine, standing just behind the FBI team, watched his reaction like a hawk watching a dying fire. Her hand rested gently on Bruno's back, the scarred shepherd now lying quietly at her side. A sentinel whose nose had done what entire systems failed to catch. Ethan stepped forward again. We also recovered analog documents from the safe, handwritten notes, printed drop schedules, and, most significantly, a signed agreement for a multi-phase information exchange in return for offshore bank transfers. Each detail, each number, each asset transfer is now in the possession of our federal cybersecurity task force. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is no longer a trial about circumstantial espionage. This is the exposure of an intelligence operation hiding in plain sight, executed by a man who sat behind that desk. He pointed at Grayson and smiled while doing it. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was choking, heavy, as if the very courtroom itself realized it had been used, manipulated as a shield to protect a traitor. Then Anna stepped aside, and Jasmine took one slow step forward. She wasn't required to speak, but she did. I stood in this courtroom and watched people question whether a dog could detect truth, she said softly, her voice steady. They didn't believe what Bruno saw, or what I felt. But the truth doesn't need permission to exist, and now it's laid out, page by page, drive by drive, fingerprint by fingerprint. He thought we wouldn't see it, but we did. And now the whole world will too. Not a single person blinked as she stepped back, because in that moment, everyone understood. The courtroom had shifted. The scales of justice were no longer held by men in robes or lawyers in $1,000 suits, but by a woman they tried to silence and the dog who refused to stop listening. Victor Grayson had once been the picture of impenetrable arrogance, a man who wore smugness like a second skin, untouchable behind legal jargon, fabricated denials, and the sharp-tongued elegance of his defense attorney. But now, as the full weight of evidence pressed down on him like a collapsing ceiling, that facade began to crack in real time. The color had drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly hue of ash. His shoulders sagged just slightly. His eyes, once narrowed with calculated confidence, were now wide, scanning the room like a trapped animal. Still, he clung to the illusion of control. He adjusted his tie. He squared his papers. He took a slow sip of water, as if one carefully choreographed movement might put the nightmare back in its box. But then it happened. Bruno rose. No command, no signal, just instinct. The same instinct that had saved a president's life, the same instinct that had led federal agents into a buried intelligence fortress in rural Virginia. And now that instinct was walking, step by step, toward the man who had built his empire on betrayal. The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the soft clicks of Bruno's nails against the floor. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She simply stepped aside, giving Bruno a clear line of sight. The dog's gaze never wavered. Grayson, halfway through reaching for another legal document, froze mid-motion. His mouth fell open slightly. Bruno stopped just short of the defense table, his eyes locked on Grayson's like he was looking through him, into him. Then came the growl. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Deep, vibrating, unmistakable. The kind of sound that triggers something ancient in the human mind. The knowledge that you've just been marked. Bruno's head lowered, his hackles rising just slightly. His body didn't lunge. He didn't bark. But his message was clear. I remember you. Grayson flinched. A shiver rolled down his spine so violently that he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. His hand slipped. His water glass tipped and shattered on the floor. He staggered back from the table as if the air itself had turned toxic. His attorney stood, confused, trying to catch him, but Grayson had already started to unravel. I need, he choked out, lips trembling. Your Honor, his voice cracked. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, filled with panic. I want to change my plea. The courtroom gasped, and even Judge Harper, who had seen cartel lords, weapons smugglers, and foreign spies crack under pressure, sat forward. Repeat that, the judge said, his voice low and severe. Grayson nodded so fast it looked like his neck might snap. I did it, he said, louder now, desperation seeping through every syllable. I gave them the files, I gave them everything. The Chinese handlers, the network plans, the names. I didn't think. He stopped, breath caught in his throat. I didn't think anyone would find out. His attorney tried to interject, but Grayson shoved him aside, speaking now in rapid, frantic bursts. It started small, data leaks, nothing sensitive, just testing the channels. Then they offered money, then pressure, then threats. I thought I could manage it, control it, but it got out of hand. I was in too deep. He looked to Jasmine. She knew. From the start, she knew. And that dog, his voice broke. He looked at me like he knew my soul. Judge Harper's gavel slammed once, the sound like thunder in a tomb. Mr. Grayson, for the record, are you formally changing your plea to guilty on all counts? Grayson nodded, barely able to hold himself upright. Yes, guilty. I'm guilty. The courtroom was frozen in disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. And then all eyes turned to Jasmine and Bruno. The woman who had been doubted, dismissed, and disregarded. The dog they had nearly retired. They stood like statues in the chaos they had just shattered. Calm, composed, unshaken. Judge Harper adjusted his robe slowly, eyes lingering on Jasmine with something that had never crossed his face before. Awe. Let the record show, he said, his voice heavier than ever, that in this courtroom, truth was not delivered through conventional means. It was unleashed. Jasmine said nothing. She looked down at Bruno, gently scratched the spot behind his ears where the scar was deepest, and whispered so only he could hear, Good boy, you did it. Bruno wagged his tail once, quietly, purposefully, because in that moment, the verdict wasn't just legal, it was undeniable. Grayson hadn't been broken by arguments. He had been unraveled by truth in its purest form. A scarred dog with no agenda, a woman with no armor but instinct, and a silence that spoke louder than any prosecutor ever could. The courtroom didn't just react, it erupted. As Judge Harper's sentence echoed through the chamber, the air snapped like a tension wire finally severed. Journalists whispered urgently into recorders and phones, their voices quivering with the realization that history had just been made. Several jurors looked shell-shocked, gripping the edges of their seats as if bracing for aftershocks. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into murmured tears. Even the court officers, hardened veterans of high-profile trials, stood a little taller, the weight of the verdict anchoring them in the moment. Judge Harper didn't blink. He didn't need to raise his voice. His words, sharp and final, carried their own gravity. This nation trusted you, he said, staring down at Victor Grayson, who now sat sunken in his chair, like a man drowning in his own guilt. And you sold that trust piece by piece to the highest bidder while cloaked in a government badge. The judge's voice, though calm, struck with the precision of a hammer against glass. For your betrayal, not just of laws but of lives, you are hereby sentenced to life in a maximum security federal prison. No parole, no leniency, no absolution. He leaned forward, pausing just long enough to let the weight settle. You will live out your days behind concrete and steel, watched by the same government you once tried to dismantle. Then he turned toward the gallery. His voice softened, but only slightly. Let it also be known that this court acknowledges a witness who did not speak, who could not testify, but who acted with clarity, precision, and integrity unmatched by any human present. Bruno, the service dog, did what entire systems fail to do. He sensed the truth. He is hereby recognized as an instrumental part of this trial and a guardian of justice. We owe him and his handler our deepest respect. The room stilled again, this time not in silence, but in reverence. All eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett. She stood slowly, tears stinging her eyes but refusing to fall. The weight of everything, the doubt, the accusations, the humiliation, the relentless battle to be heard, pressed in on her chest like iron. And yet she didn't stumble. She crossed the floor with quiet, undeniable strength and dropped to one knee beside Bruno. He looked up at her, tail thumping once on the floor. His eyes, warm, intelligent, steady, locked with hers, and something ancient passed between them. Not relief, not pride, understanding. She placed both hands gently on either side of his face and leaned in close, her forehead brushing his. "We did it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We finally did it. They tried to shut us down, tried to bury what we saw, what we knew. But they couldn't. You held your ground, and I followed you through the fire." She closed her eyes for a moment, then added even softer, "You saved this country, Bruno. You saved me." He didn't bark. He didn't move. But somehow in that stillness, the truth roared louder than any declaration ever could. Behind them, the courtroom began to move. Papers shuffled, law clerks packed files, agents collected evidence crates. But none of it mattered. For Jasmine and Bruno, this was the only moment that counted. The moment when everything they fought for was no longer doubted, no longer silenced, no longer brushed aside as instinct or emotion or illusion. Anna Reynolds approached quietly, her expression one of awe. "He'll never see freedom again," she said, nodding toward Grayson, "because of you two." Jasmine looked up, eyes shining but strong. "Because of us," she corrected, "because we never stopped trusting what others were too afraid to believe in." Across the room, Judge Harper removed his glasses, watching the scene not as a jurist, but as a witness. A man who, despite all his years in law, had just seen something no precedent could explain. That sometimes justice doesn't come from the system, but from those willing to stand against it, even if one of them walks on four legs. Jasmine Crockett never asked to be a hero. She wasn't chasing headlines or hunting glory. She wasn't even supposed to be in the courtroom that day. Her official role as White House press secretary had ended at the threshold of legal oversight. But where others drew boundaries, Jasmine stepped over them. Not recklessly, not arrogantly, but with a calm, unshakable belief that something was wrong. While senior officials dismissed the charges as a political stunt and seasoned investigators wrote Grayson off as a paper ghost, Jasmine listened to the gaps in the narrative. She watched the way Grayson never blinked during certain questions, how he smiled when he shouldn't have, how his calm looked too rehearsed. And most of all, she listened to Bruno, the only one who didn't care about decorum, procedure, or public image. He responded to patterns humans couldn't perceive, and Jasmine didn't just observe his cues, she trusted them. In a room full of experts with credentials, Jasmine held on to the one tool they couldn't quantify: intuition. And in doing so, she cracked open a case that none of them dared to believe. Bruno was never supposed to come back into the field. After the bombing in Brussels, after the scars and the surgeries, the agency had signed his retirement paperwork with solemn bureaucratic finality. But Jasmine tore it up. She saw something in him others had written off, a fire still burning behind those watchful eyes, a mind still sharp, still connected to that ancient line between predator and protector. He was wounded, yes, slower maybe, but his soul remained unshaken. When Jasmine brought him into that courtroom, they scoffed. They said it was theater, that she was desperate for attention. But Bruno didn't bark for approval. He wasn't there for show. He was there for one reason only: to expose the threat others couldn't smell. His first growl was dismissed. His second froze the courtroom. His third unraveled a man who had betrayed an entire nation. Bruno didn't just prove himself, he redefined what it meant to be vital. And when the systems failed, when every safeguard fell short, it was a dog who stood tall. But none of it would have mattered without unity. The strength of this mission wasn't in one person or one moment. It was in the way five completely different people, each broken or underestimated in their own way, chose to trust each other. Jasmine brought the fire. Bruno brought the instinct. Ethan Brooks, the hardened counterintelligence agent, brought the authority, but more importantly, the humility to say, I was wrong. He'd doubted Jasmine. He'd questioned Bruno. But when the clues aligned, he didn't cling to ego. He acted. Anna Reynolds, the government's most relentless federal prosecutor, brought the law's fury, but she also brought clarity. She set aside skepticism and stood with Jasmine in court, reinforcing her with legal steel. Rachel Morgan, Bruno's handler and trainer, added the missing piece, a bridge between beast and human, decoding the language of instinct into something even the courtroom could understand. Together, they weren't a team formed by bureaucracy. They were a force shaped by necessity, trust, and shared defiance. Each of them carried wounds. Jasmine of being underestimated and dismissed. Bruno of physical pain and near obsolescence. Ethan of misjudging truth. Rachel of watching her work shelved too soon. And Anna of being told what battles were winnable. But their alliance transformed those wounds into weapons. When Grayson's defenses fell, when the hard drives were opened and the safe revealed its secrets, it wasn't just the collapse of a spy network, it was a triumph of unorthodox courage. The kind that doesn't wear medals, the kind that doesn't make headlines, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, but leaves shockwaves in its wake. So when the courtroom fell silent after the sentence was passed, when Bruno sat quietly at Jasmine's side, no longer growling, just watching, when Anna closed her folder with finality and Ethan stepped back from the evidence table with the weight of the nation lifted just slightly from his shoulders, it wasn't the end, it was the proof. That loyalty is louder than lies. That intuition can pierce through any darkness. And that five people and one dog can rewrite the ending of a story no one thought they had the power to change. The courtroom may have emptied, the verdict may have been passed, but the echoes of what transpired during the trial of Victor Grayson would ripple far beyond the marble walls of justice. This wasn't just the takedown of a single traitor. It was a stark, screaming wake-up call to a nation dangerously comfortable in its illusion of digital invincibility. The devices uncovered weren't science fiction. They were present tense, built to slip through security screenings, to broadcast confidential data in milliseconds, and to vanish like ghosts. Grayson didn't need to smuggle documents or meet foreign agents in dark alleys. He used encrypted channels, burst transmission tech, and legal access to walk state secrets out the front door. What this case laid bare was terrifying in its simplicity. Modern espionage isn't loud. It's efficient, subtle, and already here. And what made it worse, what made it infuriating, was that the system built to prevent it nearly failed. Grayson operated under the noses of credentialed experts, protected by protocol, insulated by bureaucracy. The agencies tasked with guarding national security were too fragmented, too hesitant to trust instinct, too afraid to question patterns that didn't fit within neat checklists. Had it not been for Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose only weapon was her gut, and Bruno, a dog whose instincts outperformed billions of dollars in surveillance equipment, Grayson would have walked free. That's the tragedy behind the victory. Not that it happened, but that no one stopped it until a civilian and a scarred service dog forced the truth into the light. But perhaps the most haunting truth is this. Grayson isn't the only one. He was just the one who got caught. For every hidden transmitter found beneath a courtroom table, how many remain buried in boardrooms, government buildings, server rooms? The war for national security is no longer fought with armies. It's fought with silence, with fingerprints on glass, with off-the-books bank transfers and code strings buried 6 layers deep in fiber optic shadows. And if the justice system continues to scoff at gut instinct, if it keeps sidelining those who notice the small things, those who pay attention to body language, to breathing patterns, to dogs growling when no one else hears the danger, then we are building our own vulnerability with gavel and robe. Yet through all of that, through the darkness, the failure, the deception, a lesson burned through the fog. Courage is contagious. Jasmine didn't just follow her instincts, she defended them. She was mocked, sidelined, doubted at every turn, but she stood firm. And when Bruno backed her, without words, without ego, their bond became something unbreakable. Not just between woman and dog, but between truth and action. That bond rippled outward. Ethan Brooks, the seasoned FBI agent who first rolled his eyes, found himself trusting Jasmine's every glance. Rachel Morgan, Bruno's trainer, gave the system one last chance to believe in the animals it had cast aside. And Anna Reynolds, the steely prosecutor, chose to fight not just with facts, but with conviction. Together they forged something that tore through lies like a blade through paper. A coalition born not of protocol, but of instinct and belief. In an era of technological espionage, when enemies hide behind screens and betrayal moves at the speed of code, this case taught us that we need more than tools. We need truth tellers, people who pay attention when no one else does, people who listen to a growl in the silence, people like Jasmine, people like Bruno. Their story isn't just one of justice, it's a blueprint for resistance, and a call to remember that sometimes the smallest voices, the quietest instincts, are the ones that catch the monsters hiding in the noise.